All right, so welcome to Overtime here at Matt's Mishmash podcast. Lucas and I are going to go through our respective brackets. We set up a field of 64 bands and we seeded them 1 to 16. So the way I tried to do this was I tried to think of which bands were your favorites and I put them as the 1 seeds. I took my favorite bands and put them at the 2. And then from 3 to 16, I based it either on your level of interest in them or awareness, because I know some of these bands you've probably heard on Turbo, but I wasn't sure how familiar you are, with say like Faith No More or some older bands. And so that's how we set it up. So why don't we just start in the Northwest and work our way down the left side of the page, and then we'll jump to the other side over there. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, so our first matchup was Korn versus Muse. I think I can guess how this turned out, but I picked Korn on mine.
So I also picked Korn. I think that was pretty obvious.
Yeah, I figured that was an unfair setup for Muse. Same like this one, the 2 and 15 matchup was Slipknot and Flyleaf. I picked Slipknot.
I also picked Slipknot.
Good man. Now it started to get a little more interesting. So I had Papa Roach against White Zombie, and I actually picked Papa Roach.
I also picked Papa Roach.
Oh, that's funny. So White Zombie is classic. I mean, they have tons of stuff that are considered classics in the genre. I personally prefer Rob Zombie's solo stuff versus White Zombie, but I also feel like Papa Roach, I don't know, dude, that album Infest was the first heavy music I ever actually really dug into.
I mean, yeah, like that first album by them, like I'm very iffy about a lot of their other stuff, but like I couldn't get over how good that first album was. Like I do like White Zombie quite a bit, but like I just couldn't get over Infest, Last Resort, all those songs between Angels and Insects. It's just a great album, so I have to pick Papa Roach.
So moving on, this one was tough for me between Chevelle and Metallica. I kind of wished that I would have changed this one, because Chevelle, 9 times out of 10, I would have chosen them over another band. But it's Metallica, man, so I had to go with them. Who did you pick?
To be fair, you just can't not pick Metallica. I have to go with them. I mean, personally, I think they have, like, a lot more, like, listenable albums. It was difficult because I love Chevelle. Like, I just think that first album and even, like, their second album are just fantastic. Like, The Red, really, really good song, and, like, all those, like, Chevelle's just a good band. Like, Vitamin R, one of my favorite Chevelle songs, and yeah, it was hard, but I have to go with Metallica.
So moving on, we have Incubus and Finger 11. Finger 11's weird for me because they were a high school friend's favorite band. He got me into them, and we actually got to meet them in the city once and saw them at a really small venue, so that was kind of a cool experience. But Incubus is and still remains one of my all-time favorite bands. And for me, Morning View, if I had to pick one perfect album to take with me to a desert island and never listen to anything else again, Morning View would definitely be one of my top 3 considerations for that spot.
I mean, I kind of definitely agree with you. Like, their first 3 albums, like, if you count Science as their first album, then I guess their first 3 albums, you have Science, and then you have Make Yourself, and then Morning View. I just find those 3 albums, like, fantastic. Incubus is definitely in my top 20 favorite bands. Like, I listen to them all the time, and I love hearing them on Turbo. So, yeah, like, I couldn't not go with Incubus, I really only know, like, one Finger 11 song, so I have to go with them.
Yeah, right. They had One Thing was, like, their hit, and then Paralyzer was a more recent one that took over. They have some really good stuff, but, man, their sound changed tremendously from their first 2 albums on. I mean, I would definitely recommend checking out their first 3 or 4 albums, but they sort of fell off for me.
Yeah, I'll definitely check them out.
So now we have Evanescence against 30 Seconds to Mars. I went with Evanescence because their first album, Fallen, was not only the best album of the year it came out, but it still holds up almost 20 years later. And 30 Seconds to Mars is a really good band. I know that they have a really rabid fan base, but for me, I just looked at the full catalog of Evanescence, and it was a no-brainer.
Oh yeah, Fallen is definitely a game-changing album in my opinion. Like, Bring Me to Life is definitely one of my most listened to songs like ever, and that just whole first album is so good. Like, Amy Lee's vocals mixed with like the guitars and like all the instruments, I just find it like breathtaking. And like 30 Seconds to Mars, they are a good band, but like I couldn't not go with Evanescence just because of like how good that first album is.
Right, and if you look, the ripple effect of that album is pretty insane. Evanescence went on to inspire Lizzie Hale in part, right, involved with Hailstorm. And now there's a band called Plush that's getting a lot of play on Octane, that you can kind of draw a straight line back through Amy Lee's early albums and stuff.
Amy Lee, she definitely influenced a bunch of like newer artists, especially like you said, Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm. Like, I personally really like Hailstorm, so like I love hearing that influence from Evanescence because I just think she influenced, and that whole band influenced so many different artists now.
All right, so just to recap, so we've got Korn, Slipknot, Papa Roach, Metallica, Incubus, and Evanescence. Is that right? That's what mine is.
That is exactly how mine is as well.
That's pretty funny. All right, let's finish out the Northwest section here. So we have Queens of the Stone Age going up against Nonpoint. Nonpoint's a band I hadn't heard of until recently, just like Mudvayne. Well, I had heard of Mudvayne, but Nonpoint was one I never really paid attention to, but I'm getting more into their stuff. But Queens of the Stone Age, Songs for the Deaf is another one of those albums that from start to finish is just unbelievable. And the fact that you've got Dave Grohl doing the drumming and the video for No One Knows is just, it's unbelievable. So for me, it was Queens of the Stone Age. Who did you take through?
You know, I think Queens of the Stone Age is definitely a fantastic band, and you know, their first couple albums are definitely some of my favorites, but I have to go with Nonpoint. You know, their first album, I like can't get over how good it is, and you know, me and my dad definitely jam out to them quite a bit, so you know, I went with Nonpoint.
Oh, right. Look, finally, we've got an upset here, at least a change in perspective. That's awesome. And to close out the Northwest, we have Rammstein and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I love the Chili Peppers, but I don't really think of them as a turbo band necessarily. It was Rammstein through to the next round.
You know, I definitely think, especially thanks to Turbo, that Rammstein has like entered as one of my favorite bands. But, you know, personally, I had to go with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. As much as they're not really a turbo band, I just couldn't get over how good those, like, first couple albums are. And, you know, I went with the Chili Peppers personally.
All right, so moving to the Southwest, we've got Breaking Benjamin and Days of the New. Travis Meeks is a phenomenal acoustic guitar player, and anything that he's involved with is usually top-notch. But for me, Breaking Benjamin, that's tough to beat, so I had them going through.
You know what? Breaking Benjamin's in my top 5 favorite bands, so, you know, it's pretty obvious that I was going to go with them.
So I'm sure you won't be surprised at my 2 and 15 matchup, but Stone Sour versus A Perfect Circle, it was Stone Sour all the way. I love Judith. That's an unbelievable song from A Perfect Circle, but Stone Sour, just from album to album, they're one of my all-time favorite bands, and so it was a no-brainer for me to send them through.
You know what? I didn't even realize, but, like, I went with A Perfect Circle. Like, now that I think about it, I probably should have changed my decision and went with Stone Sour, but, you know, Maynard, he's pretty hard to beat, though, like, Corey Taylor, love him so much, so, like, it was a pretty hard decision for me.
I know this next choice probably isn't going to be popular with my music friends, but in the Godsmack and Tool matchup, I went with Godsmack. Now, I'm not going based off of musical talent or technical aspect. I was going, if I had to just grab one album to throw on from either of those bands, I realized that there were at least 2 more Godsmack albums that I would listen to start to finish than the Tool records.
I sort of agree with you, though. Tool is a fantastic band musically and technically, and I mean, all of their, like, different stuff with their instrumentals are just out of this world. But personally, just listen to them so much over the years, I had to go with Godsmack. That first self-titled album, and then you have, like, Awake, and then you have Faceless. I think those 3 albums are almost, if not all, perfect albums. And Godsmack is one of those bands you could just throw on and like sort of bang your head to. They're just a good band. Although Tool is a fantastic band, have to go with Godsmack.
Yeah, and their acoustic stuff is really good too. Good, so we can be pariahs together. Now, the next matchup is another one that I'm sure would go against the popular opinion. So between Deftones and Cold, I went with Cold. Cold was not a huge band by any means, but they had 2 or 3 albums where they just have a unique thing going on, and Scooter Ward's vocals work really well. The guitars, the lyrical content, it's all just so dark, almost Korn level dark, but not quite there. And so I went with Cold with the upset over Deftones.
Personally, I think that Cold is a really good band. Like, 2 of my favorite songs are Stupid Girl and Just Got Wicked. Those 2 songs I think are fantastic, and like you were saying, Scooter Ward is definitely one of those vocalists who, just fits so perfect with all the other instrumentals. But just going off of how much I like them, I had to go with Deftones. Adrenaline, Around the Fur, and White Pony. Those 3 albums are just albums I could turn on, and they sort of take me into a different place musically, and I just had to go with Deftones.
And a fun fact, so you mentioned the song Stupid Girl. That was actually a Rivers Cuomo song. So Rivers from Weezer wrote that, and Cold wound up recording it instead.
Oh, I did not know that, actually. I didn't know that, it could have... I didn't know Stupid Girl could have been a Weezer song.
When I found out, it blew my mind, because I had heard the song 1,000 times. And once I found out, now I can't picture it being sung by anyone other than Rivers. It's pretty funny. Think of it the next time you hear it, and see if you pick out, the Weezer aspects of it.
Oh, yeah. Now whenever I hear that song, I'm going to think of Rivers, Cuomo, and Weezer.
All right, so moving forward, we have Hoobastank and Drowning Pool. So my first real concert was actually Hoobastank, and they're another band. Their first couple of albums were just unbelievable, and then they sort of just fell off the face of the planet, unfortunately. Drowning Pool had some great songs. I know, it was a big tragedy with the lead singer, and they seemed poised to take over the nu metal world. But for me, especially based on those first 2 albums alone from Hoobastank, they had to go through.
I totally agree with you. Those first 2 Hoobastank albums, they're just... Those 2 albums, I think, really, they had their, big popularity in the early 2000s, and it's pretty upsetting that they fell off the map, because I think they're a fantastic band, and personally, I did go with Hoobastank, but, Sinner by Drowning Pool is a good album, but, everything after that was very but, it is a tragedy about the whole lead singer and everything, but, Hoobastank, I had to go with them.
Yeah, and just to nerd out for a moment, musically speaking, Dan Estrin was huge into open E tuning for I keep saying the first album. They had an album, the Basketball Shorts album, preceded the one that had Crawling in the Dark and Running Away. But but I still think of that one as their first album. And all of those songs in open E, I never thought it could actually be heavy sounding, but he made it work. Especially a song like Pieces, that was really, really cool. So moving along, we have Filter versus Static X. So Filter is cool because Richard Patrick, first of all, his brother is a famous actor. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all. He was in one of the Terminator movies, the second or third one. But Richard Patrick actually started out with 9 Inch Nails and broke off to do his own thing. So I love Filter. I know everybody is familiar with Welcome to the Fold and Hey Man, Nice Shot, but their later stuff was actually really, really, really good. But in terms of industrial metal and stuff, nobody beat Wayne Static, man. That Wisconsin Death Trip is just unbelievable, and so I went with Static X over Filter.
And you know what? I basically agree with everything you said, and just speaking musically, I like more heavy stuff. So Static X was the big choice for me, and I totally agree. Wisconsin Death Trip is just one of those albums you could just turn on and have a good time listening to it. Although Filter is a fantastic band, Static X, they just had to take the cake.
Yeah, and for me, so many songs off of the Wisconsin Death Trip album should totally be on the Turbo Workout channel. So Push It, I'm What's Stupid, I Am, they're all really, really, really good tunes to work out to.
Oh yeah, it definitely should be on the Turbo Workout station.
All right, so just about closing out here, we've got Foo Fighters and POD. So POD is great. It's actually Tim's favorite music video is the one for Boom, where they have all the ping pong and stuff. And I loved Sleeping Awake from the Matrix soundtrack. But it's the Foo Fighters, man.
Oh yeah, POD is definitely one of those bands that definitely influenced a lot of people, especially in the Christian scene, because they were a big Christian metal band, got a lot of Christian kids into new metal. But just because I appreciate Dave Grohl so much, and I just love the first Foo Fighters album, and Learn to Fly is one of my favorite songs, I had to go with them.
Yeah, I'm actually reading Dave Grohl's Storyteller book right now, and it's as good a read as I expected it to be, or better. It's really, really cool. I would highly recommend that. All right, so closing out our Southwest region, we have Rob Zombie and, funny enough, Power Man 5000. So Spider-One, definitely a unique dude, just like his brother. A couple of great songs from Power Man, but it's Rob Zombie, dude. Dragula, Super Beast. I mean, Rob Zombie through for me. How about you?
You know what? I agree with you. Power Man, they are a good band, and Rob Zombie's brother, Spider, he's a pretty unique guy, and that first Power Man 5000 album, I forget what it's called, that was a pretty good album, but you gotta go with Rob Zombie. I mean, Dragula, like you said, that's one of my most listened to songs, especially Turbo-wise, and Super Beast. I mean, Rob Zombie is definitely such a unique guy, and musically, and even live, I've never seen Rob Zombie live, but I've seen YouTube videos. He definitely puts on an awesome live show, so Rob Zombie, I have to go with him.
Oh, dude, his live show is unbelievable. I think when I saw them at PNC, he had this 16-foot tall alien monster thing. It was something else. I've never seen a live stage set quite like they had. All right, so let's go to the Northeast. So we have Linkin Park against Default. So Default really just had Wasting Time as their one single. They had a good album or two, but Linkin Park.
Linkin Park is in my top 5 favorite bands, and everything about them I just absolutely love. Hybrid Theory and Meteora, I think, are 2 of the best rock albums of all time, and I think they're masterpieces, no skips on either of those albums, and Chester Bennington's vocals are just so unique, and I think they were a really creative and game-changing band.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, Linkin Park were definitely my first favorite band, and they still are today. They'll always have a sentimental space for me, and everything that they've done, for better or worse, has been revolutionary in the field, so that's definitely a good pick. All right, so this one hurt me because I love both of these bands, and between Disturbed and Bush, it came down to longevity, really. So Bush's first few albums were, again, top-notch, but some of the later material sort of fell off for me, and Disturbed, they've never lost steam at all, so I put them through to the next round.
Yeah, Bush, their first couple albums were definitely game-changing, especially in, the 90s rock and alternative scene. But, when it comes to early 2000s and, rock music now, Disturbed are definitely very revolutionary in, the whole Turbo era. You think about an album like The Sickness, which has, the songs, Down With The Sickness, and it's got, Stupefy. And, Disturbed Hinder definitely is just one of those bands that's like super game changing in the scene, and like you couldn't not go with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Now we have two down bands. We've got System of a Down taking on Three Doors Down. This might be a surprise upset. I love SOAD. Their stuff just from start to finish has been great, but there's a sentimental value for me with Three Doors Down, because when The Better Life came out, that was really the album that sent me off into guitar. Like when I got my guitar, I learned how to play all of those songs. That was the album that I just sort of clicked with. And so I'm not necessarily saying they're better than System of a Down, but I sent Three Doors Down through to the next round. How about you?
I personally went with SOAD because, you know, I just think that, like, Toxicity is just one of those, like, things, like you were talking about earlier, one of those albums you could just, like, if I had to pick an album, I could, like, bring on to a desert island and, like, listen to that for the rest of my life. I would definitely pick Toxicity as one of my, contenders, and like, you know, I just think System of a Down, they really haven't released any bad material. Like, as long as they've been around, like, they really haven't released a bad album per se, and you know, I just think System of a Down, I have to put them through to the next round.
All right, moving on, we have Nine Inch Nails against Hinder. So Hinder I saw live once. I loved their first album. Their second one was okay, and then they just sort of fell apart. I thought the live show they sounded good, but they just had this really extremely derivative aspect to it. Like, the lead singer really looked like he was trying too hard to be like Steven Tyler, and then just the whole party vibe, you know, they felt almost like a Def Leppard or, you know, some 80s hair band ripoff, basically. And Nine Inch Nails is Nine Inch Nails, man, so they went through for me. How about you?
Yeah, Hinder's definitely one of those bands that's really weird in my opinion. Like, whenever I listen to them, I can't really, like, get into them very much. And like you said, they're basically like an 80s hair metal band ripoff, but like for the Turbo era, and you know, their music, like, lyrically and just like musically is not very good. And you know, Nine Inch Nails, like, Trent Reznor and that whole band are just fantastic. Like, the Downward Spiral, that's one of those albums that, like, I could just listen to every day if I wanted to and never get tired of it. So yeah, I had to go with Nine Inch Nails.
All right, I threw you your first curveball here. I knew this one was going to be tough. So I put 3 Days Grace against Blackstone Cherry. Now, Blackstone Cherry is great, but 3 Days Grace, it's weird because there's the before Adam and after Adam era. And for me, based on the Turbo years, that is solely the Adam era, and I love every song that they wrote together. So for me, it was 3 Days Grace too, but I wasn't sure which band you were going to go with, so who'd you pick?
This personally for me was the most difficult pick on the list aside from like, I forget which other one, but this was definitely the most difficult, and the reason is 3 Days Grace are one of those bands I've been listening to since I was like very young, and they're sort of like sentimental to me. Like, I've listened to like all their albums. I'm not a huge fan of everything after Adam, but you know, everything from that first self-titled album to Transit of Venus, I think is like masterpiece material. But just going off of like my personal experiences, I had to go with Blackstone Cherry. You know, I've seen them in concert twice. I've gotten 2 set lists from them. I've gotten like 8 guitar picks. I have a signed album by them. So I've just had a lot like bigger and like better experiences with them. But like musically, I love 3 Days Grace so much, but Blackstone Cherry was my pick.
I just realized this is pretty funny. I got to meet 3 Days Grace and Blackstone Cherry at the same concert because Blackstone opened for 3 Days Grace at Starland, and they were really, really cool. I remember the song Rain Wizard from Blackstone Cherry just blew my mind. It was so good. But yeah, I knew that one was going to be tough for you. All right, so moving on, we have Nickelback and Crossfade. I thought I was going to pick Crossfade straight away because that first album of theirs was just tremendous. But Nickelback, despite all the negative press and stuff that they get and the silly complaints from people, they know how to craft really, really good, catchy songs. And so for me, it really, once I gave it some more thought, it was a no-brainer. So Nickelback through.
Oh yeah, like I did like a practice bracket before I did this one, just to like sort of practice everything, and right away I was like, oh yeah, Nickelback, they're like bad, I'm gonna go with Crossfade. But then when I thought about it, I was like, I actually kind of like Nickelback, you know. They have that one song, Burn It to the Ground. That's just, like, such a good song for, like, Turbo. And just, like, I feel like they should play that song way more. Like, they hardly ever play Nickelback. And I feel like that should be one of their songs in regular rotation. And like you were saying, as much as, like, how bad people say Nickelback are, it was sort of a no-brainer to go with them. Like, they just have had so much more better hits. And, you know, you have to go with them.
So I don't know what goes into their programming decisions, but I would guess that the reason we don't hear more of those songs, like the ones you mentioned, is I think they fall out of the time range that they use for Turbo. Because really the only reason... I mean, I think I've heard only 2 or 3 songs from Nickelback, but it makes sense because those are the ones that came out before 2005 or 2006.
Right, like, I think that, like, the, like, main, like, listening point for Turbo is around, like, 1997 to, like, 2005 or 2006, and, like, the song Burn It to the Ground falls more in, like, the, like, 2008 spectrum, which they do play songs from that, like, era, but, like, I think that, like, Nickelback sort of falls out of that region a little bit, so, yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
All right, so I threw another difficult one your way. So this is Soundgarden against Audioslave. I know I'm in the minority here. I really like Audioslave, but I think they're way overrated compared to Soundgarden and other bands. When you look at classics like Black Hole Sun and Spoon Man, I mean, there's just so many songs. Rusty Cage, they're classics. I mean, it's just the composition, everything about those Soundgarden tunes are unbelievable. So I went with Soundgarden over Audioslave.
You know what? Everything about Soundgarden is out of this world good, you know. Chris Cornell just vocally is, like, I think one of the best vocalists ever. And, like, their instrumentals are just out of this world good. But, you know, thinking about it, that first Audioslave album, I just can't get over how good it is. I mean, Chris Cornell and the members of Rage Against the Machine is just such a good combination that, like, I had to go with Audioslave.
All right, so finishing out the Northeast region, we have Marilyn Manson and Fuel. Fuel, straight through, no questions.
I personally went with Manson. As much as I like Fuel, I just really like the first couple Manson albums, and, you know, I just think, like, he's definitely a very strange guy, but, you know, his music is just pretty good, so I had to go with him.
Cool. All right, so now we're in the Southeast bracket, and we've got Shinedown against Faith No More. Shinedown's a love-hate relationship at this point for me because their first few albums were tremendous, and then once they moved away from the heavier stuff and really just went, I don't know, almost not quite pop, but softened up a bit, it fell off a little bit. I like Planet Zero, the new single. I'm kind of hoping that, you know, maybe they're going to get a little bit of their edge back, so I took them over Faith No More.
Yeah, I also went with Shinedown. Like, everything up to Amaryllis, I think, is fantastic, but the stuff after that was pretty rough, and I agree with you. Planet Zero is a fantastic song, but just thinking of, like, sentimentally, they were my first favorite band, and, like, they were the band I listened to the most when I was younger. As good as The Real Thing by Faith No More is, you know, I had to go with Shinedown.
All right, so now we have Stained and Edema. Stained was actually the first band whose music I ever played as part of a band. It was crazy playing Mud Shovel, but that was pretty cool. Edema is interesting because I think Mark Chavez is the lead singer. He's the half-brother of Jonathan Davis. And so, you know, some of the Edema stuff was good, but they're another band that got really weird later on. So for me, it was Stained going through.
Yeah, Edema was okay. Like, some of their early stuff was pretty good, and, you know, but I had to go with Stained. Like, think about it. Like, you have Dysfunction, and then you have, like basically, like, everything after Dysfunction up to around their, 2000. You know what? I feel like although they sort of like got popular over the years, I feel like they haven't really released a bad album. And that one album they released before they like went on hiatus or broke up or whatever, the 2011 album, I thought that was a fantastic album. It was so heavy and raw. It was just a awesome way to end off their like career before their hiatus, but they're back now, and I just had to go with Stain. They're just such a good band.
Now, for this one, I definitely think I'm in the minority here between Cedar and Allison Chains. Allison Chains is, for me, on par, if not above, Soundgarden. But what made me pick Cedar over them was just the sheer volume of material. Like I said before, they have like 7 or 8 albums worth of stuff where there isn't a single skippable song for me.
Yeah, Allison Chains is my favorite like band from like the early 90s, like quote unquote grunge era. But you know, Cedar, like if you think about it, they are like their vocalist Sean. He has like a pretty grungy voice. A lot of people compare him to like Kurt Cobain and stuff. So he like definitely fits into like the post grunge category. But you know, Cedar, like they really haven't released anything like bad per se. You know, they started off with their first album. I think it was like Disclaimer, it was called, and then they did their like they did the one album with The Remedy. I'm like blanking on the name right now, but you know, I don't think Cedar has released any bad material.
No, one thing though that I do like about Alice in Chains is that one of my favorite bands of all time actually was a big inspiration from them. Heart is also from the Seattle region, and it's funny, people don't realize the reach that they had, you know, from the era that they were involved with, but I thought that was cool. All right, so next up is Limp Bizkit and Pantera. Pantera, I put them through.
This was quite a hard one for me. I mean, Pantera are such a good band, and I picked them for my practice bracket. It was a hard pick, and I'm sort of like rethinking my pick now that I think about it, because like Pantera are just such a good band and like heavy music. But I went with Limp Bizkit. I don't know. I just think they're like first couple albums are pretty good, but like now that I think about it, Pantera definitely has better material, and Limp Bizkit could be pretty corny. I went with Limp Bizkit.
Well, funny enough, the next one is something that you've got me rethinking now. So we have Seven Dust and Fear Factory. I'm thinking I should have gone with Seven Dust because Black, Waffle, so many of their songs are just unbelievable, and I've heard that they're really, really good live. But I went with Fear Factory really just because of the heaviness factor. I love the song Manic Cure, and they have some of the most influential albums of that time, so I put them through the next round, but I am rethinking that one. How about you?
I personally went with Seven Dust because, like, you know, you have songs like Black and Waffle, like you mentioned, and, you know, Seven Dust, they're just, like, a really, really good band. Like, they're really heavy, like, now that I think about it. And it's funny because I read this article one time how they said they used to have like them, like they came out back in the 90s when they first started. When they played live, they used to come out like bouncing on like trampolines and stuff. So that I find that really, really cool. And you know, Seven Dust, I went with them.
So we've got Rage Against the Machine against 10 Years. So 10 Years is another band. They sort of fall into that like cold category for me where they're not terribly hugely popular, but man, their stuff is good. And I saw them live only once when Hailstorm and 10 Years opened for Shinedown, and each band was progressively better, but they all blew me away. So I wanted to go with 10 Years, but man, Rage Against the Machine just has so many unbelievable songs, so I had to go with Rage for this one.
You know, 10 Years are a really good band. Like, their first 2 albums are some of my favorites. Like, Wasteland's one of my favorite songs of all time. I just think it's, like, a really, really good song. But I had to go with Rage Against the Machine, like, their self-titled album, and then you have, like, Evil Empire and the one album, The Battle of Los Angeles. Those are just, like, monumental albums in, like, the, like, a new metal scene, or like they're not really new metal, they're sort of just like, I wouldn't say rap rock, they're just like a metal with rapping, but like, you know, they definitely popularized the genre, so I went with Rage.
So coming into the final 2 here, we've got Stone Temple Pilots and Mudvayne. I think for my money, STP has more songs that I like, but because I'm getting more into Mudvayne, and again, because we're talking about turbo and like heavy music, man, Mudvayne is really hard to beat. Dig is just an unbelievable banger. They have so many songs that really come closest to producing the kind of reaction in me that Slipknot does. And there aren't many bands that do that. And so even though I think STP is like just a mainstay of that grunge era, I had to go with Mudvayne.
You know, I, like, agree with you. Like, STP, like, if I think about it, like, they definitely have so much better songs than Mudvayne. But, like, LD50, not many bands could beat how good that album is. Like, to, like, start off your career with an album as good as, like, LD50 is like really hard for a lot of bands, and you know, I still think that LD50 should have been just as popular as Self-Titled by Slipknot. You know, Self-Titled is a very hard album to beat because, you know, they had the popularity at the time, but I think LD50 should have had the same popularity as Slipknot. And you know, also in my personal life, when I did my Zoom call with SiriusXM Turbo, I got to meet Chad Gray, the lead singer of Mudvayne. So Mudvayne definitely has more personal connections with me, and I have to go with them.
Cool. All right, and to close out our round of 64, we have Saliva and Puddle of Mud. Neither band for me really does too much. I know the Puddle of Mud, I think it was Come Clean was the album. I love Drift and Die. I love Blurry. You know, if I had to go one album from each band, I would go with Puddle of Mud's album. So that's why I put them through.
Yeah, I agree with you. Neither band really, like, rings a bell for me. Like, I personally not a big fan of either, but you know, just because I like their hits a lot more than Saliva, I went with Puddle of Mud.
All right, so let's jump ahead to the round of 32. So we can go a little more rapid fire here. I have a feeling I know where some of this is going to go for you. I did not intend for Korn and Slipknot to meet so soon for you, but this is just how it played out. So in the round of 32, we have Korn against Slipknot. I think I know how it's going to turn out for each of us. I picked Slipknot. You picked?
I picked Korn, but to be honest, out of this whole bracket, that was the hardest decision I had to make, you know. Slipknot is my second favorite band ever. I mean, everything about them I just love. But, you know, since Korn is my all-time favorite, I went with them.
Next up, we have Papa Roach and Metallica, two bands that have put out a ton of music. I went with Metallica based on the strength of their stuff in the 80s, but also Death Magnetic was my favorite album from them. All Nightmare Long is just a killer song. So I put Metallica through.
Oh yeah, I also went with Metallica. Metallica definitely has more memorable material, and they're definitely the more memorable band. And if you think about longevity, really the only, like, great Papa Roach album was Infest. And, like, you know, Metallica have had, like, a bunch of great albums, and they're just a monumental band, so I went with Metallica.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next up we have a tougher one for me, Incubus versus Evanescence. Incubus has the edge for me with a couple more albums. I do really like Fallen and some of the other later stuff from Evanescence, especially their most recent album. But if you look at Morning View, you look at Make Yourself, you look at A Crow Left of the Murder, Light Grenades, any one of those albums, I would consider taking on that desert island alongside Morning View. And for me, 11 a.m. is just the best set of lyrics that I've ever seen. It's such a great metaphor for a lost love, and it's great. So I put Incubus through.
Yeah, I also put Incubus, just, like, thinking about how good their, like, basically all their material is. Like I was talking about earlier, those first three albums, it's very hard to beat those. And, you know, like you were saying, 11 a.m., like, just lyrically and musically, really good song. Like, fantastic song. If I'm, like, thinking about it now, I went with Incubus.
And dude, what's more relaxing than Aqueous Transmission, right? Listening to the little frogs and the kodo. I think it was a kodo. I know it was a weird stringed instrument.
That's such a, like, relaxing song to listen to.
Well, and that's what makes Morning View such a great album, is the diversity of songs. You have something really heavy like Under My Umbrella, and then you have the softer stuff. You have, like, the jazziness of, you know, some of the other tunes. So it's really cool. So to close out the Northwest round of 32, we have, this is one of the ones that we differed on completely. So for me, it was Queens of the Stone Age against Rammstein, and I went with Queens of the Stone Age based on the strength of Songs for the Deaf and Like Clockwork. But you picked Nonpoint and Red Hot Chili Peppers, so who did you send through?
So personally, I went with Red Hot Chili Peppers, just thinking about their longevity and how good, like, those albums by them are. Like, Californication is one of my all-time favorite albums, and I feel like, you know, Californication and then By the Way and then the Stadium Arcadium, those three albums in a row are just like really hard to beat. And musically, I think the rhythm section from Red Hot Chili Peppers is one of the best out there, so, you know, I went with them.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. All right, now we're in the Southwest. For me, I had Breaking Benjamin going up against Stone Sour. I went with Stone Sour. It was a tough call, but it's Corey Taylor, man, you know? So for me, I had to go with it. Hydrograd. Honestly, if I had to pick, if you forced me to say one album that would be my desert island one, it would be Hydrograd, now that I'm thinking about it. But for you, I know yours was a little different, so who did you pick with yours?
I did Breaking Benjamin versus Perfect Circle, and this was a pretty easy one. I went with Breaking Benjamin.
An easy one for me, Godsmack versus Cold. I went with Godsmack. The only complaint, if I even have one, about the band is they've sort of reused the same musical ideas to create new songs. Faceless is great because it stands out because it doesn't have that, but like The Enemy has almost the exact same rhythm structure and notes and stuff from one of their earlier hits, but there's just something about them that I really, really dig, and so I had Godsmack going through.
I did Godsmack versus Deftones, and this was a hard one for me, but I went with Deftones just like because, you know, I think they really revolutionized the music, like rock music overall. They were sort of like Korn. They like revolutionized that whole scene, and, you know, Godsmack's a really good band, definitely one of my most listened to. But just like thinking about it, White Pony is one of those albums that has like no skips, and I just personally think it's a masterpiece. So yeah, I went with Deftones.
Are you familiar with Chino's side project Crosses?
I haven't really checked it out much, but I probably should.
I definitely would recommend it. It's more ambient, but it's really, really good. It sort of captures what I like about his vocal styles. So for me, the next set was Hoobastank and Static X. My problem with Static X was outside of the Wisconsin Death Trip album, there really wasn't much that I could think of, whereas with Hoobastank, there were 3 or 4 albums that I really, really dug, so I sent them ahead to the Sweet 16.
I personally went with Static X just because I'm a big fan of the more heavier music, and, you know, Wayne Static, he's just one of those vocalists, like, who's really unique in the scene, and, you know, I went with Static X.
So to close out the Southwest bracket, I had to go between Foo Fighters and Rob Zombie, and just looking at the Foo Fighters' body of work, it's just, there's so much more to work with, and as much as I love a lot of Rob Zombie stuff, I think there's just so much more from the Foo Fighters that I dig, especially off of Wasting Light. Pretty much every album, with the exception of maybe 2. So I went with Foo Fighters as my final entry.
Yeah, I also went with Foo Fighters, basically just going off of how much I, like, appreciate Dave Grohl as a person, and just how much, like, Foo Fighters have had a couple, like, really, really good hits, and I think they were a perfect step in the water right after Nirvana ended, because, you know, I think Dave Grohl, he had already been writing this material, and I'm so happy he put it out because Foo Fighters turned out to be a really good band, so I went with them.
All right, off to the Northeast, I have Linkin Park and Disturbed. It was really the sentimental value that moved Linkin Park ahead because Disturbed just has such a strong back catalog, but I went with Linkin Park.
Yeah, I also went with Linkin Park just because of how much Hybrid Theory and Meteora mean to me. Like, those 2 albums are, like, just so good. And, you know, Disturbed definitely have a really, really good, like, catalog, but, you know, you couldn't not pick Linkin Park.
I agree. For me, I had 3 Doors Down and 9 Inch Nails. I liked the songs off of The Better Life more than almost any album from 9 Inch Nails, but the Downward Spiral, aside from it being a musical masterpiece, like you said so eloquently before, it actually has it developed into a plot point for me with one of my novels. It was an important aspect of one of the characters, and so because of that personal connection with it, I moved Nine Inch Nails ahead.
I had System of a Down versus Nine Inch Nails, and like you were saying, the Downward Spiral is just one of those albums that is just like so revolutionary, and it's just one of those no-skip albums that I could definitely bring onto a desert island, and if I wanted to, listen to it every day until I die. But I had to go with System of a Down, just thinking about how good like Toxicity and like their whole catalog is just like out of this world good, so I just went with System.
So we have, from my side, 3 Days Grace and Nickelback, two Canadian bands. No brainer for me, 3 Days Grace through.
I had Blackstone Cherry versus Nickelback. This is probably the easiest pick I had to do. I obviously went with Blackstone Cherry. I mean,
And to close out the Northeast, I know your mom's not going to be happy with me. I had Soundgarden and Fuel, and I moved Fuel forward because Something Like Human is just an unbelievable album, and so many of the songs on there just stand out against the wealth of other music that was released at the same time. And so for me, I had to go with Fuel. How about you?
I had Audioslave versus Marilyn Manson. It's kind of a no-brainer. I went with Audioslave just because of how good vocally and musically they are.
All right, and now to close out our round of 32, we're in the Southeast with Shinedown and Stained. Really, for me, Aaron Lewis is a phenomenal singer. Brent Smith is a phenomenal singer. If you start matching up, both bands, it can be pretty tough. But Shinedown's 3 consecutive albums, I mean, there aren't many bands that can have 3 albums in a row that are just unbelievable start to finish, so much so that even the B-sides from some of the albums and the bonus tracks are better than some band singles. So as much as I like Stained, I sent Shinedown ahead.
Yeah, I did the same. Like, Shinedown has just one of those bands who, when they came out, they were like so different than everybody else because they had the original lineup, and then so you had their first album, and then you went Leave a Whisper, Us and Them, and then you had Sound of Madness. And just that whole lineup change for Sound of Madness, I think, was the best decision they made in their career, because Sound of Madness turned out to be such a masterpiece. And then they followed that up with Amaryllis. So I think those first 4 albums are just like so good. And they're definitely one of those bands that I've listened to the most in my life. So yeah, I went with Shinedown.
I recently just found out that Rick Beato was the guy who produced the first Shinedown album. I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with his YouTube page?
I'm not sure, actually.
He is as passionate as you are about music, but he just exudes everything that we love about music. And I've learned so much from his channel. I actually bought his ear training program, and it's already helping me to improve just picking out notes and stuff.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check him out. He sounds like a cool guy.
So for me, I have Cedar and Pantera next. I love Walk. I love just the heaviness of Pantera, but again, too many songs that I love from Cedar not to, to send them through. So Cedar's through to tip through the next round.
I had Cedar versus Limp Bizkit, and this was kind of a no-brainer. Limp Bizkit's really good. Their first 2 albums are fantastic, and, I do think that they have a really good instrumental section. Wes Borland's one of my favorite guitar players of all time. But, just the corny aspect of it, and, all the, bounce riffs and friends rapping, I had to go with Cedar. I think they have a better discography overall, and their longevity definitely withstands Limp Bizkit by a mile.
Totally agree. On my side, I have Fear Factory and Rage Against the Machine. I don't think I had a quicker choice than this one. Rage went straight through.
This was kind of a hard one for me, so I had Sevendust versus Rage Against the Machine. And, Rage Against the Machine is one of those bands that's definitely very influential, especially in my guitar playing, and Rage Against the Machine overall has, awesome albums, and that first album and Evil Empire are 2 of my favorite albums of all time. Killing in the Name is such a good song, and then but Sevendust, I kind of had to go with them.
Whoa, wait, you went with Sevendust over Rage?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, go ahead. What's the explanation?
So Seven Dust, I mean, I hadn't first got into them until a couple years, but they sort of just blew me away, you know? Everything about them is just good. I mean, I think that they have one of the best vocalists in the metal scene, and you know, their instrumentals are awesome. Morgan Rose is one of my favorite drummers ever, and you know, Black and Waffle, I just can't get over how good those songs are, so I went with Seven Dust.
Yeah, dude, that tremolo intro for Black is just killer. Wow, if people were betting on our bracket, I think you would have made somebody really happy with that pick. That's great. All right, so to close out, I have Mudvayne and Puddle of Mud. Mudvayne straight through.
I agree. I have Mudvayne versus Puddle of Mud. Probably the easiest pick, Mudvayne, all the way.
All right, so now we're into the Sweet 16. We'll pick up pace here a little bit. Slipknot and Metallica, I mean, two heavyweights of their respective arenas, but Slipknot is my all-time favorite band, so Slipknot went through to the Elite Eight.
I have Korn and Metallica. Metallica is definitely one of those bands that everybody loves, and they're so influential to the metal scene, but just because of how much I love Korn, and they're my all-time favorite band, I went with Korn.
So next, I had Incubus and Queens of the Stone Age. It just came down to the back catalog again. There's just too many songs from Incubus, and too many songs that sound great, both as they were recorded and acoustically. If you've ever heard the acoustic versions of some of their songs, especially Pardon Me, it's unbelievable. So I have Incubus going ahead.
So I had Incubus versus Red Hot Chili Peppers, and you know, Incubus is definitely one of those bands, like I was talking about, Morning View, I would definitely listen to every day until I die. It's just such a perfect album. But just thinking about it, I definitely like Red Hot Chili Peppers just a little bit more than Incubus, just because of like Flea and everybody in the band, so I went with Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Dude, I gotta tell you, I'm so surprised, and I kind of feel like I undersold RHCP when I was doing the seating. If I would have realized that you dug them as much as you did, I think I would have changed their spot. All right, Southwest again. I've got Stone Sour and Godsmack, with Stone Sour sailing straight through.
So I have Breaking Benjamin versus Deftones, and I personally had to go with Breaking Benjamin just because they're probably like my third favorite band aside from Korn and Slipknot. I appreciate them so much, so Breaking Benjamin was my pick.
And my final set here was Hoobastank and the Foo Fighters. I mean, I was transported right back to the years 2001 to 2004 here. And as much as I love those Hoobastank albums, dude, it's Dave Grohl. I mean, enough said. I'm going Foo Fighters.
And, you know, I have Static X versus Foo Fighters, and, you know, as much as I love that industrial metal and as much as I love Wayne Static and all that heaviness, I had to go with Foo Fighters, you know.
And actually, I had asked you earlier in the podcast about your like musical bucket list thing. I've been fortunate to have met all of the guys in Linkin Park. I got to meet Corey Taylor. I mean, I've just had the best luck with having those special experiences, but the one guy that I haven't gotten to meet is Dave Grohl. If there was one dude that I would love to just hang out and talk, it's definitely him.
Oh yeah, I would definitely want to meet Dave Grohl. He just seems like such a genuinely like nice and just respectful guy. He seems so awesome, and I would want to hang out with him.
All right, moving into the Northeast, I have Linkin Park going up against Nine Inch Nails. I love Nine Inch Nails. I respect Trent Reznor's just amazing musical mind, but Chester Bennington just has too much of a connection to me. And dude, I mean, a 37-second long scream and Giving Up, come on. So I put Linkin Park through.
I have Linkin Park versus System of a Down, and you know, as much as I love the whole System of a Down band, and as much as I think Serge Tankian's vocals are so unique and awesome, I had to go with Linkin Park. Just going off those first two albums, and you know, talking about how good Chester's vocals are when he goes from his like such aggressive screaming to like these beautiful vocals, I had to go with Linkin Park.
Yeah, dude, I mean, his cover of Rolling in the Deep was unbelievable. So for the next one, I have 3 Days Grace going up against Fuel. I'm kind of surprised because I thought I would have gone with 3 Days Grace, but I went with Fuel, I'm guessing based off of the Something Like Human album.
Next up I have Blackstone Cherry versus Audioslave, and as much as I love Audioslave, and as much as I love Chris Cornell and that first album, I had to go with Blackstone Cherry just because of how sentimental they are to me, and just because of how much they, like, have done for me, and I've seen them twice, so I went with Blackstone.
Moving to the southeast, this one was tough for me too. So it was Shinedown and Cedar, and I really grappled with this one because even though Shinedown has fewer songs that I liked, I kind of feel like the songs I love from Shinedown, I love just a little bit more than Cedars. But man, there's just so many tunes across so many albums. It was tough for me to say no, so I moved Cedar ahead.
Yeah, this was a tough one for me, especially because of how much I love, like, Cedar, and I love the song Gasoline so much. Like, I had to go with Shinedown. As much as I don't like some of their newer material, they just hold a special place in my heart. Like, they were my first favorite band, so I had to go with Shinedown.
And to close out the Sweet 16, I had Rage Against the Machine going up against Mudvayne. And I think there's probably more Rage songs that I like, but again, this is based on more of a recent relationship that I'm developing with Mudvayne, and oh man, there's just something about them that I'm really excited about exploring their back catalog. So I moved Mudvayne ahead.
I had Seven Dust versus Mudvayne, and as much as I love Seven Dust and like Black and all those songs, I had to go with Mudvayne, so I put Mudvayne through to the next round.
All right, so now we're on to the Elite Eight. In my Northwest bracket, I have Slipknot and Incubus, and Slipknot moved right on.
So I had Korn versus Red Hot Chili Peppers, and although I love Red Hot Chili Peppers so much, Korn had to go through. They're my all-time favorite band. I love everything about them, and, you know, Korn, they were the elite pick.
I had Stone Sour and Foo Fighters going head-to-head, and talk about two massive musical personalities, right? Corey Taylor and Dave Grohl. But again, just too many songs that I absolutely cannot listen to enough, and that I love to play on guitar, and just really, really, really powerful stuff for me from Stone Sour, so they moved on.
I had Breaking Benjamin versus Foo Fighters, and, you know, Dave Grohl, one of my favorite drummers or, like, guitar players, vocalists, whatever you want to call him. He's just one of my favorite guys, but Breaking Benjamin definitely hold way more of a special place in my heart musically and, like, vocally, and just, like, they were the first concert I had ever seen live, so I had to go with Breaking Benjamin.
All right, in the Northeast, I have Linkin Park and Fuel. Linkin Park.
I had Linkin Park versus Blackstone Cherry. This is gonna make my mom mad, but although Blackstone Cherry have done so much for me, like they have given me 2 set lists, I've seen them live twice, I have a signed CD, and like 8 guitar picks. I mean, I had to go with Linkin Park just because, like, I've been listening to them longer, and just, like, their, like, whole catalog definitely means so much more to me, like...
Right, and dude, Numb has, like, 1 billion views on YouTube. There's a reason for that, so I think that's a fair pick.
Yeah, like, I'm pretty sure Numb and In the End both have 1 billion views, so, you know, they're doing something right.
All right, so to close out my Elite Eight, I have Cedar and Mudvayne, and I moved Cedar on ahead because of the variety in their songs this time. I really feel like Mudvayne hits on all the heavy cylinders, but Cedar, they can do softer songs, they can do heavy stuff, screaming vocals, clean vocals, you name it. So I moved Cedar on to my final 4.
I had Shinedown and Mudvayne, and you know what? Shinedown are just one of those bands. I've been listening to them for like 7 years now. They were my first favorite band. They're still in my top 10 at least. And you know, I can't get over how good those first 5 albums are, so Shinedown was my pick.
Sweet. All right, so moving to the final 4, I guess this was a good setup for me. In terms of the seating, because these were just gut-wrenching decisions that I had to make at this point. Slipknot and Stone Sour are my 2 favorite bands right now, so to have to choose one over the other was really, really, really difficult. Hydrograd, like I told you, is my all-time favorite album, but Slipknot, they've just continued to raise the bar album after album, and they've lost members, they've gained new members, and personally Jay, I think, is filling Joey's enormous shoes really, really, really well. We Are Not Your Kind is right up there with Hydrograd, and I can only imagine how great the next album's going to be. So as much as it was difficult to say goodbye to Stone Sour, I have Slipknot going into the championship round.
So I have Korn versus Breaking Benjamin, and this was a gut-wrenching pick because as much as I love Breaking Benjamin and as much as I've listened to them and appreciated them over the years, Korn are my ultimate pick always because, I've seen Korn live 3 times. I have a drumstick from them. I, have basically all my shirts are Korn shirts. So, Korn is just one of those bands that, have to go through to my final.
And for me, it came down to Linkin Park and Cedar on the other side of the bracket. And funny enough, what got Cedar through to this point is what moves Linkin Park ahead. The diversity of albums that they have, just the new metal mastery that they had on Hybrid Theory and Meteora, the shift to basically a rock band on Minutes to Midnight, the electronic aspects of Living Things, and then in between those, 1,000 Suns was just, I don't know. I know a lot of people didn't like that album, but I thought it was a masterpiece. So I went with Linkin Park.
My pick, I have Linkin Park versus Shinedown, and this was quite a rough one for me because Linkin Park are one of those bands that just never get old for me. Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda's vocals together just they flow together so well. And Mike Shinoda, when he raps, it doesn't even sound forced like other people. It just sounds so fresh and clean, and it sounds natural basically. And as much as I love basically all of Linkin Park's catalog, just the sentimental appeal to Shinedown for me made me go with them, so I have Shinedown in my top 2 finale.
Sweet. And for me, the championship round came down to Slipknot and Linkin Park. So Linkin Park spent over a decade as my favorite band. I have so much of a connection with so much of that material. So if it came down to the sentimental aspects of it, you would think that nothing would top Linkin Park. But Slipknot, I went to see them for the first time 2 days before Sarah was born. So they were sort of on my mind right when she entered the world. And then when her and Timmy were little, and then when Jack was little, I used to put on Volume 3, and they would lose their minds. It was hilarious and adorable watching them in diapers have circle pits to Before I Forget, Pulse of the Maggots, all their great songs. Actually, after that concert in 2012, I wound up setting Before I Forget as my ringtone, and I've literally heard it every single morning since I did that. So we're talking about almost 10 years at this point, and as much respect as I have for Linkin Park, as much love as I have for Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda, and Rob, Brad, Joe, and Phoenix, I had to go with Slipknot as my bracket champion.
So this is a rough one. Shinedown versus Korn. So Shinedown is my original favorite band. They were my favorite band for a good 5.5 years. I mean, Bully was probably my favorite song by them, and just everything about Shinedown up until that point was so great for me. And their newer stuff became kind of iffy for me. And then I was looking for new material to listen to, and when I first listened to Korn, it was I was in New York visiting my aunt, and what I did was I listened to Blind for the first time, and I heard that Are You Ready? And everything changed after that point. And then I listened to some of their full albums, and that one album I listened to was Issues. That was the album that changed everything for me. That became my all-time favorite album, and it still is to this day. I've been the biggest Korn fan ever for a good 5 years now. That I've started listening to them in 2016, and they're still my favorite band in 2022. I have 10 Korn shirts. I've seen them live 3 times. I've been Jonathan Davis for Halloween. So you know what? I really, just going off of my favorite Korn was the ultimate winner for me.
Oh, dude, you couldn't have said it any better. That was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do the picks and for sharing all that awesome insight into your thought process there. I can relate to that circumstance because I loved Linkin Park and was totally on board with them right up until Minutes to Midnight. But then when A Thousand Suns came out, embarrassingly enough, I kind of turned my back on them for a little bit, and then Living Things pushed me even further away because it felt like they were cashing in on like a trend of pop music at that time. And I believe that was 2012, which coincidentally was right when I went to see Slipknot. So it's funny that we both had really, really, really strong connections with one band, and then during a dip, I guess we fell in love with our absolute all-time favorite bands. So thanks so much for filling out your bracket. Thanks so much for spending all this time with me on the podcast. I can guarantee you that you will hear more from him down the road. So if you're into music and you're passionate about it, if you're a